Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. If you enjoying this fanfic then press the like button and subscribe my channel.
Let's start a fanfic. What if Naruto's parents returned and he formed the ultimate forbidden harem? Part 3. Fu continued to look down at the sphere Gaara had encased himself in. It had already been a little over a minute since he'd done this and she was no longer keen on waiting on him. Whatever he was doing that was taking this long couldn't be a good thing in her eyes. With that in mind, Fu tore through the air towards the sphere which responded to her assault with one of its own. An arm of sand shot out at her, forcing Fu to twirl her body over it in order to dodge. Gaining a bit more altitude, she stopped abruptly as she went through a few hand seals before breathing deep and bringing a hand to her lips. Futon. Rinpun Rinkuden. Breathing out, Fu fired off a volley scale powder enhanced bullets of wind that whistled through the air and impacted Gaara's sand sphere. They drilled into the sphere and for a moment there was silence. Then Gaara screamed. The sand around the Aikibi Jinchuriki fell away. Standing there, clutching his bleeding shoulder was Gaara, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and suffering. You! Gaara growled out as he looked up to Fu. Through the haze of bloodlust and his mother's directions, Gaara was beginning to realize he was outmatched. I don't want to die. Mother. She wouldn't let me run away. I can't. I won't. I will prove my existence. I have to. I have to feel alive. The moments of contemplation in Gaara's mind brought forth a whole new wave of killing intent from the boy. Feeling this, Fu rushed forward, intending to put Gaara down before he tried anything funny. She would be just a second too late. Before Fu could reach her fellow Jinchuriki, Gaara's body began to change. It was a swift transition, too quick for Fu to attack him before it was over, yet just slow enough for her to think she could. Now she was mere inches away from a miniature Shukaku, and there was nothing she could do about it. With a growl, Gaara's tail shot forward. Fu brought up her arms, blocking the blow. Unfortunately, the pure brute strength behind the attack sent her flying back, giving Gaara just enough time to inhale a large quantity of air. Fu stabilized herself just in time to watch Gaara exhale. Mugen Sajin. Daitapa. The squall shot forward, slamming into Fu with bone-breaking force. If not for her Biju cloak, she'd have surely broken a few bones. Continuing to fly back, she crashed into a tree and it too was uprooted by Gaara's jutsu. Fu and a majority of the trees that had surrounded them flew back, tearing a swath through the forest. Gaara gave chase. Hijiri jumped through the trees, attempting to locate her teammate. She was almost back to where she'd left Fu when she felt it. A violent wind swept through the trees, making her stop on a branch. She'd never felt anyone aside from herself and Fu generate that much wind. Focusing her senses, she felt Fu's immense chakra pressure, a pressure she only associated with Fu using her Biju cloak. That probably would have made her breathe a sigh of relief if not for the equally powerful pressure that was far too close to her teammate. Taking off through the trees at a faster pace than before, Hijiri knew one thing. Fu was in need of assistance. Groaning, Fu struggled to her feet, feeling lucky that none of the trees Gaara had demolished fell on her. Well, I'm not the luckiest Biju for nothing, Fu. This is so not the time, Chome. Looking around, Fu didn't see Gaara. He must have sent her flying further than she'd expected, but she could definitely feel him coming. With that in mind, she took to the skies and flew in the opposite direction. She wasn't running away. She refused to just leave a rampaging Jinchuriki that she'd set off to come across any poor, unsuspecting genin in the forest. What she was doing though, was giving herself some time to catch her breath after having it so thoroughly knocked out of her. She had to give Gaara props, for being the Jinchuriki of the Aikibi, he still packed a hell of a punch. You shouldn't underestimate any of my kin, Fu, Chome scolded. Despite being the weakest of us, Shukaku is still a force to be reckoned with, as is his vessel. Sighing, Fu hummed her agreement and made it a mental note to take everything about Gaara seriously from now on. She now knew she didn't have the luxury to do otherwise. Naruto's conglomeration of chains ran through Orochimaru's body with a crunch that silenced the clearing. Sasuke and Sakura looked his way in jaw-hanging astonishment. It was slightly different from what they'd learned, but they knew exactly what that jutsu was. Now they just wondered one thing. How did Naruto learn it? For just a moment, naivety set in for the young Uzumaki and he thought himself successful, until he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand. He whipped around with his kunai at the ready and sliced an incoming snake from head to tail before he leapt back, his eyes glancing down at the Orochimaru he'd killed, only to find a log. Kawarimi, thought Naruto, I should know better. You know the Hiraishin, or some variant of it at the least. For one so young, that is quite interesting. You've piqued my curiosity, Naruto-kun. The way Orochimaru said his name sent shivers down Naruto's spine. I've decided, you, Sasuke-kun and that young Kusa Kunoichi all have such curious abilities. I must have you all. As for the pink-haired child, well, considering that Konoha won't be standing for too much longer anyway, it shouldn't matter when one of their genin ends up dead, don't you all agree? He asked with a sadistic smile spread across his lips. Naruto wasn't about to have any of that. Spawning 4 more Bunshin, they rushed for the Sannin as Naruto spoke up. I'll kill you before I ever let that happen. Your bravado truly knows no bounds, Orochimaru replied as he merely watched the clones approach. I'll have to work that out of you thoroughly. 2 of the clones took the lead as one slid low, the other one jumping for a flying kick at the Sannin's face. Orochimaru jumped over the sliding kick as he blocked the flying one with his arm. Bringing his feet down, he aimed to stomp the Bunshin below him out of existence only for its arms to shoot upward, spreading Orochimaru's legs fluently to avoid being popped as it continued the slide through his limbs. Now behind the Sannin, it shot to its feet, aiming for a blow to the spine as the clone that had gone for the flying kick used Orochimaru's arm to flip over him and aim for his neck. As this happened, a third clone shot forward as well, stopping in front of Orochimaru abruptly and forcefully driving its foot into the ground before striking out with 2 fists aimed at the Sannin's chest. Slightly impressed, Orochimaru finally realized where he'd seen moves like Naruto's before. Smiling to himself, the Sannin blocked the 2 attacks at his back with his elbows as the sword of Kusanagi freed itself from his throat and stabbed through the Bunshin at his front. Swiftly, Orochimaru whipped around with it and sliced through the clone in the air, giving the clone at ground level just enough time to deliver an open-palmed strike to Orochimaru's abdomen. Hardly feeling the blow, Orochimaru's arm shot out and the Bunshin popped soon after. Whipping back around, his eyes caught sight of 2 white flashes. In a flash, one of the remaining Narutos was at his back as another appeared from above. The Naruto at Orochimaru's back went for the same twin fist strike as one of the Bunshin that had come before him as the Naruto from above used a stream of chains from his body to wrap around the Sannin's limbs. Ryusei. The twin strike hit hard, breaking Orochimaru's spine. Immediately, the Narutos realized something was wrong. There's no way a Sannin would actually be hurt from the technique of a genin. Even when Naruto considered the fact that he'd been using one of the Ryuchoken's Dogeki Yushiki techniques, which were meant to break bones, he doubted a shinobi of Orochimaru's caliber would be affected by it when a genin was the one who performed it. And he was right. The Orochimaru the Naruto's attack turned to mud and as the earth broke beneath the Naruto on the ground, Orochimaru's arms shot out and took hold of his legs. With a tug, he pulled the Naruto below the surface up to his head before exiting the earth himself. With a curse, the Naruto in the air made an hand sign, causing the explosive notes on his Bunshin in the ground to go off. The explosion broke apart the earth, rubble went flying as dust gave Naruto and Orochimaru cover. Damn, I wasted 2 uses of Haifushin just now and didn't get any, what? Naruto blinked a few times and shook his head as he squinted, trying to see through the dust. 3 uses of Haifushin and he was already feeling its special brand of consequences. Slapping his hands against his cheeks, Naruto tried clearing the haze in his mind. He couldn't let himself lose it. Not just yet. Refocusing, Naruto looked around before gritting his teeth. He'd have to use another one. In a flash of white he was gone, appearing behind Orochimaru, whom was mere feet away from his previous position. Chains shot out of his back and flew towards the treacherous snake. Orochimaru spun around, performed some hand signs, and exhaled a steady stream of fire Naruto's way. The chains tore through with ease, and as Orochimaru went to bat them away, Naruto vanished once more. Appearing just in front of the Sannin, Naruto's right hand shot towards Orochimaru's face, flattened out like a sword. Orochimaru tilted his head to avoid the blow, but Naruto's hand still grazed his cheek, drawing blood. Smiling briefly, Orochimaru opened his mouth, the sword of Kusanagi darting out. If not for the last-second Kawarimi he'd performed, Naruto was sure he'd have died. Instead, a log met its end. To think there would still be a living practitioner of the Ryuchoken, chuckled Orochimaru as Naruto repositioned himself in front of his friends. I've not met someone who could perform such techniques since the Yondaimi's wife. Speaking of the late fourth, you resemble him quite closely, and your skills are so reminiscent of that couple. Curious. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Even through the worsening haze of his mind, he could tell that the dots Orochimaru was connecting would lead to nothing good. I definitely want you just as much as Sasuke-kun now. With the two of you, I could learn not only every ninjutsu, but every fuinjutsu as well. What luck I have, smiled the Sannin. Now, unfortunately for Naruto, Orochimaru actually felt like going on the attack. Speeding through hand signs so quickly that Naruto couldn't even attempt keeping up, Orochimaru let loose his jutsu. Sweden. Daibakufu no Jutsu. From the Sannin's mouth, an enormous amount of water escaped, rising into the air and casting a large, foreboding shadow on the group of genin below it. Naruto realized they would have no escape without him. Creating a shadow clone, he ordered it to run off at full speed. Doing as instructed, the Bunshin hoped to clear the area of affect of Orochimaru's jutsu. Right when the massive swell of water was about to crash down on them, Naruto received his clone's memories, made sure his friends were all touching one another as he placed his hand on Karen's shoulder and blinked away in a flash of white. A good distance away from the jutsu, the four of them appeared once more and watched it devastate the land. The water uprooted trees and carved out a hollow in the ground. It decimated everything it hit, and nothing but a scar in the earth remained of the man-made natural disaster. As this happened, Naruto was cradling his head in his hands, his mind racing yet thinking of nothing concrete. He'd reached his limit with the Haifushin. 6 uses had already severely impaired his thought process, and if that wasn't bad enough, his latest use was just barely out of the range he was currently capable of. He couldn't afford to perform any more Haifushin, they would leave him in an unconscious heap on the ground. While the young Uzumaki was once again trying to order his thoughts, Orochimaru appeared before them once more. Taking in their kneeling forms and the look of pure exhaustion on Naruto's face, Orochimaru could tell that they had nothing else to resist him with. Naruto was finally down, Sasuke and Sakura weren't combat ready yet, and Karen's chakra was going to them. He'd won. With a smile, the Sannin began his approach, intent on collecting his prizes. Naruto watched Orochimaru approach with fear running rampant through his mind. He couldn't force it away and fight any longer, he no longer had the mental strength. As a matter of fact, he didn't have the mental fortitude to keep something even more terrifying at bay either. Looks like it is my turn, brat. And with those words, Naruto let loose an animalistic yell as he was engulfed in an oppressive red chakra, the pillar of malevolence shooting into the sky. Minato felt it. Even from the Hokage's office, he could feel the Kyuubi's chakra. He didn't need to look at Hiruzen's face to know he felt it too, but he could feel it on a completely different level. The half of the Kyuubis he had within him was reacting to the chakra, causing the Yondaime some discomfort and forcing him to rein in his chakra lest he too begin to lose control. How are we going to explain this, I wonder? Spoke Hiruzen, not truly asking a question. Believe me, by the time I get around to it, no one will be calling for blood. And if they still do, well, I'll see to that personally, Minato replied as the door burst open, revealing Homura and Kaharu. With a sigh from both the Sandaime and Yondaime, they prepared themselves to put those two in their place for one last time. Fu was busy maintaining her lead on Gaara as she saw and felt a massive spike of demonic chakra up ahead. She'd known there was another Jinchuriki in the forest, but she wasn't expecting what she was feeling now. The pure hatred from the chakra was maddening. Fu, head towards that chakra. Chomei's direction almost made the poor girl run into a tree. What? No. I have enough issues right now, don't you think? She wasn't about to deal with another crazed Jinchuriki. That's what she felt about the situation anyway. Any normal person would feel the same. Trust me on this, will you? Asked Chomei. I know exactly to whom that chakra belongs. If you lead Shukaku there, I guarantee we'll have some help taking him down. Though she was immensely skeptical, Fu gave in with a sigh. She had yet to come up with an idea herself anyway. Might as well roll with the punches, she thought as she increased her speed. She knew Gaara would continue to follow her even if she sped up. Her intention was to buy enough time to convince the Jinchuriki up ahead to help her. Fu weaved through the trees, the chakra pressure from earlier growing as she did so. As she drew near, she became more anxious about Chomei's plan. Now that she was closer, she could feel another chakra source tangled up with that of her fellow Jinchuriki. It was much more controlled, but unfortunately no less potent. Maybe you're not so lucky after all, Chomei. Hey, you win some, you lose some. No, definitely not what I want to hear out of your mouth in our situation. Fu could feel the Biju's shrug, and it pissed her off. Do you even have shoulders? Details. Details. More importantly, Fu, pay attention. We're really close. And they were. Fu snapped back to reality and looked around as she weaved through a few more trees, and that's when she saw them. In a clearing up ahead were 5 people. 3 of which were kneeling on the ground, watching the fight between the remaining 2 occupants unfold. Speaking of those 2, one was a very pale man with a creepy smirk plastered across his face and the other was her fellow Jinchuriki, clad in a cloak of red chakra reminiscent of a fox. Chomei had told her many things about his siblings over the years, so connecting the cloak to the Kyuubi was child's play. She watched for a moment as Naruto and Orochimaru did battle. The cloaked Uzumaki leapt at the Sannin, his claws nearly swiping Orochimaru's face as he retaliated with a kick to the gut that was blocked by Naruto's chakra tail. Before Orochimaru could pull back, a blast of chakra from Naruto's mouth crashed into him, sending the Sannin skidding back as Naruto pressed his assault, dashing forward. Fu could feel Chomei's need to help his kin, so she quickly made her way over to Naruto's companions. Are you with the pale guy or blondie? Fu inquired, startling Naruto's friends. The blonde, Sasuke responded, glaring at Fu. She was clad in a similar chakra cloak as Naruto, but that didn't mean much to him. She could still be a threat, and with the level of chakra he could feel from her, he knew she would be a very big one if she so chose. What of it? Humming to herself, Fu nodded and turned away from them. Good, good. I'll go help him out then. Now that I know you guys won't try backstabbing me for it or anything. That would if that happened, you know. I'd prefer not killing you guys and all, especially if you're this injured. What fun is that? Where is the honor? Though I guess shinobi don't technically have honor. Fighting fair isn't our thing and all. Leave that to the samurai, know what I'm saying. So anyway, Fu, rambling again. Oh, I was rambling, wasn't I? Thanks Chomei. Anyway, the name's Fu. Now you guys sit tight while I go help your friend. Time to do something dangerous. With that, her wings sprouted once more and she flew into the fray, leaving 3 very confused genin in her wake. What just happened? Sakura wondered aloud, her brow arched in confusion. I have no idea, Karen replied. She offered to help Naruto, and after that it gets really confusing. Who the hell is Chomei? Karen asked as she watched Fu dart into the battle, blocking an incoming strike against Naruto from Orochimaru's fist as she spun midair and nailed the Sannin in the face with a swift kick. Orochimaru, not expecting the sudden intrusion into his fight, stumbled back. Coming to a stop a few feet away from the two Jinchuriki, he rubbed his cheek, and that's right when Gaara entered the clearing, alarming everyone as he ran straight at Fu and Naruto. 3 Jinchuriki. My, well, I believe I can use this to my advantage. Orochimaru smirked as Gaara flung Sand Shuriken at his fellow Jinchuriki, only for the two of them to dodge, followed by Naruto's chakra tail digging into the ground and appearing behind Gaara moments later, smacking him in Orochimaru's direction as Fu flew towards them. Orochimaru prepared himself to swat her out of the sky, only for her to avoid engaging him or Gaara. Instead, she merely flew around the two of them, dodging when appropriate before backing off. Stopping a yard or two away from the snake and the crazy sand Jinchuriki, Fu flew through the hand signs of what Orochimaru noted as a weak fire jutsu before she fired it at them. He raised a brow, wondering what she hoped to accomplish as the crazed Ikibi Jinchuriki next to him ran towards the weak jutsu. Gaara did not get far though. Naruto's chakra tail had appeared from out of the ground again, tripping the mini Shukaku. As he fell to the ground kicking up a bit of dust, that's when Orochimaru noticed the luminous powder that had managed to elude his view until now. Fu's weak fire jutsu entered the outer layer of the powder and it immediately exploded, setting off a chain of explosions all around Orochimaru and Gaara. Rinpun Odoro. Following that jutsu, Fu performed a few more hand signs and exhaled more scale powder that shrouded the clearing. Hiden. Rinpungakur no Jutsu. With a way to hide now in place, Fu grabbed hold of Naruto, flew the boy out of the powder, set him down, and then bumped fists with him before he could even hope to protest in his angered state. Naruto's eyes shot open and he sat up quickly. Looking around, he found himself in a spacious room, the floor made of stone with intricate designs etched into them. Groaning, he stood to his feet and as he did someone spoke up behind him. Good. You're awake. Spinning around, Naruto came face to face with Fu, the towering form of Chome at her back. Wah! Fu put a finger to his lips, stopping his outburst and what she was sure would be a question. Shush. None of that. Here's the short version for now. Name's Fu. You're the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, I'm the Nanabi Jinchuriki. We bumped fists and with our Biju's consent we can enter this, she said, gesturing to the space around them, the Biju's meeting place. You were kind of running wild in the real world so I was hoping to calm you down here. Didn't know you weren't on good terms with the Kyuubi though, so this won't really help, I guess. Naruto backed up, moving his lips away from Fu's fingers. Her fingers are soft, thought Naruto before he shook the thoughts away, attributing them to his mental exhaustion. But, the Kyuubi hates me, why would he allow this? Because it was the only way I'd be able to speak to one of my more pleasant kin, brat, rumbled the deep voice of the Kyuubi. Turning around, Naruto came face to face with his tenant without bars in the way for the first time. He had to admit, the Kyuubi was far more intimidating outside his cell. How are you outside of the seal? Questioned a panicked Naruto, before Fu put a hand on his shoulder. He's not. This place is just unaffected by the seal and its effects. Or it doesn't affect the seal, or something, honestly, it's really complicated stuff that I don't get. The important thing is we're all here and we can talk. So let's cut to the chase, Fu commented. My Jinchuriki and I would like your assistance dealing with Shukaku, Kyuubi. In return, we will assist you in your battle with the pale human, Chome stated. The Kyuubi merely stared at his kin for a moment before giving an exasperated growl and a simple nod of his head. He liked Chome when he wasn't rambling about his luck and he was always up for putting that stupid Tanuki in his place, so why not? With a vicious smirk, the Kyuubi gave a more solid reply. You've got a deal. Chome returned this with a nod of his own and just as they were about to leave the realm they were in, Fu spoke up. Oh, Kyuubi, think you could actually work with Blondie out there? We're more likely to pull this off. He can use his skills along with yours instead of him just running wild. With a very audible growl, the Kyuubi eyed Fu, then Chome, and finally Naruto before letting loose an annoyed huff. He would not like this. Fine. This one time I'll help the brat out. Just so I can get a shot at screwing with the Tanuki though, the Kyuubi snarled. Withholding his thoughts on the subject, Chome merely nodded once more and then the four of them were back in the real world. Fu pulled her fist away from Naruto's and the two stood. Naruto looked around and noted how his vision was much sharper and he felt the power of the Kyuubi's chakra flowing through his veins. It was like the time he'd fought Haku, but more powerful and without the thought-clouding head rush. Truly, the Kyuubi was something else. You ready for this? Asked Fu as a futon jutsu blew away her scale powder. Within the realm they'd met with the Biju a few minutes had passed, but in the real world it had only been a moment. Standing a few yards away from them was Orochimaru. His smirk was no longer there, but he didn't seem bothered by taking Fu's Rinpun Odoro, and she knew he took the attack. His right sleeve was singed. That made her wonder though. What had she gotten herself into if Orochimaru hadn't even been injured by her jutsu? Who is this guy? Fu asked Naruto. Orochimaru of the Sannin, he replied as he stood next to her, hunched over and letting all four of his limbs touch the ground as the Kyuubi gave him a small briefing on what he could currently do in this state. Already, Naruto knew it would go well with Dogeki Yushiki techniques. What? She asked after a pause. Why would you even be fighting a guy like this? He attacked us. It was fight or let him do whatever he wanted. Not like we could run from a Sannin. Point. Well, enough chit-chat, said Fu as she rose into the air and looked towards Orochimaru again. That's when she realized something was off. Where was Gaara? Futon. Rinkuden. From a tree branch just behind them, Gaara exhaled bullets of wind, intent on having them eviscerate his fellow Jinchuriki, only for chains to free themselves from Naruto's back and block for himself and Fu. As the chains vanished back into Naruto's body, he and Fu took off. Naruto darted towards Gaara, the Ikibi Jinchuriki's tail whipping around as he spun to intercept. Naruto threw his arm out, the cloak around him flying forward and clashing with Gaara's tail before Naruto grabbed it and pulled. Gaara flew through the air towards the young Uzumaki as Naruto let go of his tail, flipped over the crazed boy, and nailed him with his chakra tail. Gaara flew further through the air, right towards Fu who was attempting to trade swift blows with Orochimaru and failing as Naruto landed on the branch Gaara had attacked them from. The Sannin may not have had the high ground right now, but he was fast. Orochimaru's neck extended and flanked her as the sword of Kusanagi once again freed itself from the Sannin's throat while he was already beginning the motions for a horizontal slash. Fu tilted her whole body back, flying backwards and passing beneath both the blade and Gaara who was a few inches above Orochimaru's sword. As she flew she spun around rapidly, creating a storm of scale powder around her that she shot towards the two of them with a very powerful flap of her wings. Both Orochimaru and Gaara, who had only regained his footing moments ago, dodged out of the powder's path. Neither of them was too keen on being caught up in that again. "No any Kaden jutsu?" Fu asked, startling Naruto as he'd heard the question seemingly within his own mind. He hadn't even seen her lips move. Choosing to ask later and just cooperate now, he replied. "Just one," he smirked, already understanding what Fu wanted. Though the two of them had never worked together before, their two tenants had and were guiding their Jinchuriki on how to best work with one another. Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu. Naruto spewed 7 fireballs out of his mouth, controlling them with his chakra and leading them into Fu's scale powder. Naruto wasn't too good with Kaden Jutsu yet, and the Hosenka no Jutsu wasn't a very strong Kaden Jutsu in the first place, but it didn't need to be. Making contact with Fu's powder would turn those small fireballs into a massive explosion. Understanding this, though not intending to work together, both Orochimaru and the crazed Suna Jinchuriki performed their jutsu in retaliation. As Naruto's fireballs hit Fu's powder, The explosion was met with a Dabakufu on one side and a Mugen Sajin, Daitapa on the other. The force of the explosion was contained and would have been overpowered if not for Naruto's newly created clone throwing him into the air, where he focused the Kyuubi's chakra before expelling it from his mouth in a powerful blast of raw energy. The chakra slammed into the clash of jutsu below, resulting in an explosion that knocked the four battling Shinboi away, all while the remaining members of Team 7 and Karen watched on. Sakura shielded her eyes as the explosion carried dust and water through the air, only one thought passing through her mind. They're like monsters. All was quiet in the clearing as Sasuke, Sakura, and Karen waited for the smoke to clear with bated breath. They hoped that Naruto and the Taki nin who'd come to help them would be the ones who would be victorious, but they couldn't be sure. Though the exchange between the four of them had been brief, they could tell that what they could only describe as a sand monster was strong, and they'd already known Orochimaru was a one-man army. Do you think they won? Worried Karen, as she rubbed at the bite marks on her arms. Sasuke and Sakura hadn't extracted her chakra for long, but she still felt a bit drained, and being bitten was never a pleasurable feeling for her. There's no telling, Sasuke replied as he gritted his teeth, watching the smoke clear. He couldn't believe what he'd just seen. The kind of power that had just been dangled in front of his eyes like a cat toy was beyond frustrating. He needed power like that. The young Uchiha couldn't understand how his blonde dunce of a teammate had gotten so strong. But he would find out. While Sasuke was mildly distracted with his thoughts, Sakura and Karen were squinting to attempt making something out through the dust, and after a moment they did. There, standing amongst the wet earth, the blown-away trees, and a few small fires was a lone figure. Karen brought her hands to her mouth, a gasp of horror ghosting past her lips and fingers a moment later. No, breathed Sakura. She could feel herself trembling already. No. There, standing amongst the carnage was a lone figure. At their feet were three unconscious bodies. As Sakura screamed, the lone victor of the battle smirked darkly. A relatively unscathed Orochimaru was the last man standing. Naruto opened his eyes with a groan as he tried sitting up. His whole body ached in protest, causing him to wince in pain, but he managed to support himself with his arms. He felt weak. His mind was still kind of hazy, though he figured that could be from the sleep since it wasn't as bad as it was during his fight, and he felt completely drained in general. Doing his best to ignore his condition, he looked around, finding himself within a cozy room containing three other beds aside from his own, a single door across the room from the beds and a window at his back. Instantly, Naruto was on alert. He knew this wasn't where he'd lost consciousness, obviously. It wasn't nearly destroyed enough, and there was a distinct lack of trees. Where am I? He wondered aloud, the door to the room opening a moment later. He tried to prepare himself for whoever would come through, but he was too drained to really do anything more than awkwardly attempt lifting himself further up. Thankfully for him, he didn't need to be prepared. Karen walked into the room, blinking a few times as she saw him awake and sitting up. Smiling, she walked over, her pace quick and almost frantic. Before Naruto could say anything, she enveloped him in a hug, mumbling into his neck about how happy she was that he'd woken up. What happened? Asked the blonde. I remember the explosion and then, nothing. Are Sasuke and Sakura okay? Are you? And what happens to Orochimaru? And Gaara? And is Fu okay? She was helping us, Karen. I hope nothing bad happened. Naruto's panicked rambling was brought to an end by Karen covering his mouth with her hands. Calm down, Naruto. I'm okay. We're all okay. After that big explosion, Orochimaru was the last man standing. He would have succeeded in carrying out his plans if not for a group of Anbu and your mother showing up. Deciding to cut his losses, he left. The mint-haired girl Fu, you called her. Another Taki nin showed up and retrieved her. I assume it was a teammate. As for that red-headed boy who had been that sand thing. Well, two other Suna nin picked him up as well. I see. Naruto breathed, weakly running a hand through his hair as he lay back down. I'm, I'm so glad. I thought we were screwed for a minute there. Karen nodded in understanding, her eyes softening. How do you feel? Really tired. I really overdid it, and that was before the whole chakra cloak thing. Yeah, about that, Karen said, you've got some explaining to do. The Hokage seems to want to hear what you have to say as well. Your team hasn't even been called in for a debriefing yet, apparently they're waiting for you to get back on your feet. I should go let them know you're awake, but, Karen trailed off here, looking over her kin with a bit of worry, get a bit more rest until I get back, okay? You need it. Rising from her sitting position on the bed, Karen smoothed out her skirt and made her way to the door while Naruto grunted out an okay and closed his eyes. More sleep sounded really good to him right about now. Naruto opened his eyes again, feeling much better than he had the last time he had them open. Sitting up, he looked around the room much like the last time, except this time he was not the only one inside. Sitting a couple of feet away from his bed was Kakashi, his face slightly obscured behind his usual orange book of smut. I see you've finally decided to open your eyes, Kakashi drawled as he closes his book and stands, depositing it back into his pouch. Naruto replied as he stretches a bit. Good. Let's go then, your father wants to see us. Sasuke, Sakura, and a few others are waiting outside the office. Nodding, Naruto got to his feet as Kakashi made his way over to him. How long have I been asleep? Since Karen was here, I mean, Naruto asked, looking himself over. He quickly realized that he was not wearing his pullover. He saw it folded up and sitting on the nearby dresser. Naruto contemplated grabbing it, but decided against it. He didn't need it right now after all. Oh, only about 3 hours. Oh, okay. Naruto breathed, relieved he hadn't been asleep for long. Kakashi put his hand on Naruto's shoulder before he spoke again. Give or take a day. Naruto's eyes widened. Wait. They vanished in a swirl of leaves, appearing in front of the doors to the Hokage's office within the tower at the center of the Forest of Death. What? Naruto's loud exclamation rang through the hall and Kakashi merely offered an eye smile. About time you woke up, Dobi. Turning around, the young Uzumaki saw quite the assortment of people. There were his teammates, Karen, Fu and 2 other tacky nin he assumed were her teammates, and rounding up the group were Hinata, Shino, and Kurenai. Why are there so many people? Naruto wondered, confused. Kakashi shrugged as he opened the door. Well, you know, circumstances, Kakashi replied, I've brought them, Hokage-sama. Naruto knew Kakashi wasn't giving him the whole story and it annoyed him greatly. Now that the door was open, Kakashi stood aside and Naruto immediately walked in, his mood already beginning to improve at the sight of his parents on the other side. The many people in the hall trickled in as well, most of them having their eyes widen in surprise at the sight of the Yondaime who was supposed to be dead. The only exceptions to this rule were Kurenai, Kakashi, and Karen. Kurenai and Kakashi had known about the Yondaime Hokage for a while now, and Karen had been formally introduced to Kushina and Minato by Kakashi after he'd received a small briefing about Team 7's experiences in the forest from Sakura and Sasuke. Once everyone was in the room, Kakashi closed the door and Kushina put up a privacy seal. Minato glanced around the room momentarily before leaning forward, placing his elbows on his desk and clasping his fingers together, creating a bridge just in front of his face. Now that we're all here, we can get started, Minato smirked. Wait a minute, stammered Sakura, why you're the Yondaime Hokage? How is this? Aren't you supposed to be dead? She asked, covering her mouth with her hands soon after. Briefly, Sakura wondered if asking someone if they're supposed to be dead was rude. Yeah, well, I suppose I am supposed to be, aren't I? Since you're on my son's team, I suppose I can tell you why I'm alive, but wait a bit, okay? Sakura's jaw hung as the remaining genin looked to Naruto in disbelief, except for Sasuke. The young Uchiha cast his teammate a brief glance, his eyes narrowed, before looking away. He'd wait to talk to Naruto about this after things had calmed down. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki himself scratched his cheek in embarrassment. Suddenly having almost all the eyes in the room on him was certainly a bit embarrassing. Kurenai frowned in the Hokage's direction, but kept her mouth closed. She wouldn't make a scene right now. On to more pressing matters, Minato continued, your three genin teams were involved in quite the confrontation, for lack of a better word. What your three teams experienced within the forest is very important to the security of Konoha, so I'd like to hear what happened. The whole story. For a moment, no one said anything. The genin wondered who should go first until Kurenai volunteered her team to start. She wanted to finish this quickly so she could go look in on Kiba again. The boy's injuries really worried her. Team 8 started the briefing with their spying on Gaara. They told the Yondaime how the Suna genin had killed the team from AIM and then noticed them. After relating how Gaara had crippled Kiba before their team was saved by Fu, they let the girl take over. Well, Sandy got really upset when I stopped him, Fu began, and well, he basically ended up going all Ikibi on me. Minato held his hand up here, motioning for the girl to stop. Glancing in Kurenai's direction was the only thing he needed to do to let the Genjutsu mistress know what he wanted. Catching his drift, Kurenai told her students that they should wait outside until the Hokage was done speaking with the others. Shine and Hinata hesitated for a moment, clearly curious about what was to be said, but conceded to their sensei's wishes and left with her. You may continue, Minato said. Fu nodded. Like I was saying, he got really hostile and almost killed me until I pulled out my Biju cloak. Ah, I'm the Jinchuriki of the Nanabi by the way. The two of us fought until he got me with this really powerful jutsu that sent me crashing through the forest. It was around that time I felt the Kyuubi's chakra, so I headed over there. Minato thanked the girl for her explanation before looking to his son and his team. Sasuke started the briefing, telling Minato about their run-in with the disguised Orochimaru and the ensuing fight. He continued on, his teammates and Karen adding to the story with their own interpretations of the events until he got to the part where Naruto let loose the pillar of malevolent chakra. Minato looked to Naruto now. Well, son, I'm fairly certain only you and Fu can go into any real detail about what happened next. Elaborate please. Naruto's eyebrows rose, threatening to vanish into his hairline. Nervously, the young Namikaze glanced around the room at the people present. He wasn't sure how to feel about this. This was his biggest secret and his father just wanted him to spill the beans. In front of his team. And foreign shinobi. Naruto had never questioned his father before, but he figured there was a first time for everything. Are you sure, Dad? I mean, I can always tell you this in a more private setting. This is pretty, you know. I understand your reservations, Naruto, but these are your teammates, Minato intoned, this is something they should know. You are going to be trusting them with your life when you go on missions and vice versa. They should have a full understanding of the consequences. And I'm sure Fu has already told her team, if for no other reason than to caution them against doing battle with you, whether that's because she finds you out of their league or views you as a comrade of sorts. I'd say it leans more towards the latter, Hokage-sama, Fu interjects. Naruto and Minato look to her as she merely eyes the two of them curiously. The Yondaime had little doubt she could tell that he was also the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. But what if they hate me? Naruto ventures, prompting his two teammates to look at him wide-eyed. Well, in Sasuke's case he only lifted a brow curiously. What could Naruto possibly be hiding that would make him think they would hate him? They couldn't understand what secret could be that big. Then better they are informed with our knowledge. If they find out some other way and decide to be hostile, we wouldn't know. At least this way, if they don't have the kind of character that we hope for, you can be removed from their team and we can keep an eye on them. I can take over as your Junin sensei if it really comes down to it as well. Sasuke narrowed his eyes as Sakura's expression became more perplexed by the second. Hurt Naruto. Sure, the Dobi was annoying but he wasn't that bad. Sasuke couldn't see himself attempting to seriously harm the guy unless he somehow managed to be involved with the Uchiha massacre, which was impossible. Now Sasuke was really suspicious. What could Naruto be hiding? Sakura was thinking along the same lines, though she could slightly understand why Naruto was afraid to tell them. She would be lying to herself if she said she hadn't been afraid of him when he was fighting Orochimaru and Gaara. His chakra had felt so dark and angry. It was hateful. Sakura found Naruto to be really annoying, or he used to be, anyway. Despite that though, even if she found him to be a bit annoying and that form of his to be frightening, she didn't see herself hating him. She'd never admit it to Naruto's face, but he'd started to grow on her. As for Karen, she knew exactly what Naruto's secret was. Kushina and Minato had told her when she met them. They'd fully intended remove her from his life before he could get to know her too well, just in case she wasn't understanding as far as his burden was concerned. Kushina was happy she had more family than just Naruto and Minato, but she would pick her son over Karen if Karen ever viewed Naruto in a way such as the villagers do. The fact that she was still standing in his presence was proof that she had an open mind and an understanding heart. Naruto frowned at his father's response but nodded nonetheless. He could understand where his father was coming from, he supposed. More than just being a Hokage worried about the village weapon, he was a parent who wanted the best for his son. If his teammates couldn't look past the fox, then they had no business associating with his son in the first place. Looking to his friends one last time, Naruto steeled his resolve and stepped forward. Okay. And then he told them. He informed him of the circumstances of his birth, how his father hadn't truly killed the Kyuubi and instead sealed it within him. He told them of why the villagers hated him, informed them of what had occurred with him during his fight with Orochimaru, and then proceeded to tell his father of what he'd experienced with Fu before the two of them did battle with Gaara and the snake Sannin. Throughout the explanation, Naruto hadn't made eye contact with his team or Karen. He didn't want to think of how he'd feel if any of them looked at him with those eyes. The eyes he receives whenever he walks through the village, the eyes he received all throughout his academy years, whether it be from teacher or student, students who had their opinions of him shaped by their prejudiced parents. The eyes full of hate. Those eyes, those damned eyes. They'd driven him into a corner where negative attention was the only thing he was allotted. Those eyes had forced a mask onto Naruto's face. If he didn't grin and bear with everything that was thrown at him, if he didn't get back up, spewing bravado from his lips every time he was knocked down, if he didn't learn to function without any true friends, then Naruto knew, he knew that he would be nothing like he was today. Naruto knew he'd be a much darker person if he'd decided to stay in the village without managing to stay strong and bear the hate of those around him. He knew he'd probably end up living up to all the things the villagers said about him. He'd become the demon they feared if he had ever allowed them to break him and still remain in the village. And if he'd left, Naruto didn't doubt revenge would be on his agenda. Naruto was fully aware he carried darkness in his heart. He was also fully aware of what kind of life he would have now had he given in. Naruto didn't want that, but he was afraid. He was afraid of his teammates and Karen's reactions. Naruto was afraid that they would reject him like the villagers and lead him back down the dark path he knew he could have ended up walking. And he didn't want that. Not when he was finally part of a family. Not when he'd finally become happy. He didn't want that at all. At Naruto's back there was silence. None of his comrades said anything. For a spine-chilling moment, Naruto imagined them staring at him with those cold, cold eyes. I'm kind of surprised the Dobi could hold back the Kyuubi. He doesn't seem to have the mental capabilities to pull such a thing off, said Sasuke. Naruto could hear the smirk in his rival's voice. In a response that could be likened to reflex, Naruto whipped his head back. Oi! Yelled Naruto, offended by Sasuke's crack at his intelligence. Sasuke just smirked back, and after a moment, it hit the blonde. He was looking at his rival, and Sasuke was smirking back. You don't care? Asked Naruto, surprised. Sasuke shrugged. You're still you, said Sasuke simply. Naruto didn't question it, he could understand what Sasuke meant, oddly enough. Sakura, Karen, Naruto ventured, hoping Sasuke wouldn't be his only remaining friend. It's a little frightening, Sakura admitted, causing Naruto to wilt slightly, but Sasuke is right, you've been burdened with the Kyuubi all your life, as knowing doesn't change that. Despite that burden, you were never different than any of the rest of us. You've never tried to hurt any of us either, and you've already proved you'd lay your life down for us. I don't really see any reason to look at you any differently now, I guess. As for me, said Karen, Aunt Kushina already told me. I don't care. I've no reason to be afraid of my family. Naruto was left speechless. He'd been so afraid, and now his worries had been laid to rest. He hadn't lost his teammates. The Kyuubi hadn't totally ruined his life yet. Thanks. You don't know how much this means to me, said Naruto, forcing back tears that were threatening to flow. Sasuke looked at his rival's expression and couldn't help but wonder at it. He looked so relieved to know they accepted him. Sasuke wanted power. Right now he wanted that more than anything, he needed it. If he wanted to kill Itachi, he needed far more power than he did now, but seeing Naruto, who had so much power at his disposal, act like this, Sasuke had to wonder, is the price for power always worth it? Before today, Sasuke would have said yes. Now, he wasn't so sure. Minato and Kushina smiled at their son and his team, happy that he had friends he could trust. Kakashi was also smiling, though it wasn't a full-blown eye smile, so it was hidden by his mask. His team certainly had a rough beginning, but it seemed that they were finally starting to shape up. Fu looked on with a smile as well, happy that one of her fellow Jinchuriki had people he could rely on. Good friends were hard to find for people like them. Thank you for your assistance with this briefing, said Minato, drawing everyone's attention. He was looking in the direction of Fu and her team. Especially you, Fu. You've shed some light on a few interesting things. I do hope we'll be able to talk to you again at a later date. Fu smiled and nodded. Of course. I'm sure Chome wants to chat more with the Kyuubi anyway, replied Fu before Minato thanked her once more and let the team from Taki know they could leave. Once Fu's team took their leave, Minato cleared his throat and spoke up once more. I believe you wanted to know why I was still alive, Sakura. Ah, why yes. I mean, if you don't mind, Hokage-sama, Sakura replied, still a bit perturbed that she was talking to a supposed dead man who just so happened to be a very famous Hokage and the father of one of her teammates who'd she not been too nice to in the not-so-distant past. Minato simply waved it off, gesturing that he did not, in fact, mind. Well, my wife and I, said Minato, gesturing to Kushina at his side, survived the sealing of the Kyuubi, but only just. Sasuke and Sakura looked to the beautiful woman at Minato's side. Sasuke raised a brow and Sakura almost gaped before she felt sick. This was Naruto's mother. This was Naruto's mother who was staring at her. She was staring at Sakura in a way that unnerved the Pinkett greatly. Sakura knew that Naruto's mom knew about her, and by extension, that meant the woman knew that she'd hit Naruto on multiple occasions. Sakura knew she was screwed. The slow, mischievous smile that spread across Kushina's lips did nothing to facilitate any thoughts for otherwise either. Ah, Minato. Do you mind if I talk to Sakura in private? I'll tell her everything while we have some girl talk, said Kushina, speaking up for the first time since the briefing had begun. Minato shot her a look, followed by Kakashi, then Naruto, and finally Karen. They all held some degree of similarity to them, which did not go unnoticed by Sakura. This only served to unsettle the girl more. Go ahead, Kushina, said Minato after a moment. Sakura began to grow pale. Kushina walked towards the girl, her unsettling smile still plastered on her face. Grasping Sakura's shoulder, she all but dragged the Pinkett out of the room. For a beat, there was silence. Then Karen spoke up. I'll go with them, for the girl talk, and all. Karen had already heard about what Kushina's intentions with Sakura were, and while she didn't condone the Pinket's actions where Naruto was concerned, she didn't really want anything bad to happen to the girl. Karen had only known Kushina for around a day, but she had already discovered that the woman could be quite, well, overbearing. The bespectacled Uzumaki wasted no time in slipping out of the door, leaving only the men remaining in the office. Ah, well, as I was saying, continued Minato. Sasuke was concerned for Sakura, to a degree. Considering the reactions of every other person in the room aside from him, he had to wonder what Naruto's mom was going to do to her, after all. At the same time though, considering the reactions of every other person in the room aside from him, Sasuke wasn't sure he really wanted to know. Deciding to trust his gut, he didn't ask. With that momentary internal conflict out of the way, the young Uchiha listened to the Yondaime's story. Once it was over, Sasuke found himself with a few questions. How did the village not know you were alive until now? Shouldn't the medic Nin have known the corpses Danzo placed were fakes? No one has seen or heard from the medics who looked over our bodies back then since Kushina and I came back, Minato responded. At this point, it's safe to assume they'd been part of Danzo's forces from the beginning. Based on what we know about the old war hawk, he probably saw an opportunity to capture Kushina and I the moment that Masked Man had been dispatched. He knew I'd have to reseal the Kyuubi and that whatever I chose to do would take a lot out of me, and Kushina was already weakened. Danzo had to have been watching well before the Masked Man attacked, considering how quickly he found us. Which means you and Kushina were targets from the beginning, said Kakashi, easily seeing the puzzle pieces fit. Yes, as are Naruto. I don't think Danzo would be so foolish as to attempt kidnapping us when I was still at full strength, which means his target was most likely Naruto. Either he wanted a subordinate with the Uzumaki family's Kekkei Genkai along with possibly gaining a very powerful seal master, or he wanted to use Naruto as some sort of leverage against me. Kakashi frowned at Minato's response. He hadn't yet considered that, but it certainly made sense. Kakashi assumed it would be much easier, still extremely difficult, considering who Danzo would be crossing, to kidnap Naruto than it would be to kidnap Minato and Kushina. And this masked man, you're sure it was an Uchiha? Asked Sasuke. Minato simply nodded. Yes, I'm positive. The Uchiha are the only clan who could hope to put a Biju under their control without the use of a Jinchuriki in the first place. Do you think the one who did it is dead then? Asked Sasuke, clenching his fists as he considered what had happened to every Uchiha within the village, after what Itachi did. No, said Minato, shaking his head with a grave expression, every Uchiha within the village was killed. That much is certain, but I know the masked man is still alive. Harishan seals last forever, and the one I placed on him was something I've checked periodically since I've managed to regain my strength. That particular seal, it's been moving. To be honest, the odds that he was even in the village before or after the Kyuubi attack is unlikely. An Uchiha of his ability going unnoticed within the walls of the village. It's preposterous. Sasuke scowled at the Yondaime's response. There was another Uchiha out there. He had another living relative, but it seemed he would have to kill this one as well. Whoever this masked Uchiha is, their actions were a blight on the Uchiha clan's name in Sasuke's eyes. He could not let that pass. I have one last question, said Sasuke. Danzo had been the Uchiha clan's representative on the council. Now that he is gone, who will be the clan's representative? You, said Minato simply, if you pass the Chunin exams, that is. If not, I can probably get Kushina to do it. Sasuke's brows dipped in confusion as he eyed Minato. What does she have to do with my clan? Oh, you don't know then. I see. Well, Kushina and your mother were great friends, great enough friends that Kushina became your godmother. The young Uchiha was rendered speechless. Orochimaru watched Kabuto and his team take out another team within the forest from behind a tree. Once Kabuto retrieved the fallen team's scroll, he turned to Orochimaru's hiding place while adjusting his glasses. Orochimaru-sama. Kabuto's teammates straightened up upon hearing their leader utter their master's name. Stepping from behind the tree, Orochimaru greeted his subordinates with one of his usual unnerving smiles. I take it the fact that you're here means it is time to have Dosu's team attack Sasuke to test his curse mark? Inquired Kabuto. No, came Orochimaru's calm reply, I did not give him the seal. I was interrupted by Konoha Anbu led by a rather problematic Kunoichi. It is of no consequence for now though. I will succeed in giving my gift to Sasuke-kun, and young Naruto-kun as well, Kukuku. Kabuto raised a brow at the addition of Naruto as one of Orochimaru's targets, but did not question it. How the boy had managed to garner his master's attention was none of Kabuto's business. What will you have us do, Orochimaru-sama? Asked Kabuto, earning a grin from his master. I have some suspicions about Konoha's current state of power after my attempt on Sasuke-kun. You've informed me that Danzo has fled Konoha for some reason and I want you to find out why after the preliminaries for the third exam ends. His fleeing may confirm my suspicions, and if it does, request his assistance with our plans for the invasion. Kabuto raised a brow, wondering why Danzo would help Orochimaru invade Konoha, but decided not to ask once more. Giving a bow, he and his team made their way to the tower. Orochimaru watched them go, his smile leaving his face. If his suspicions were correct, then Danzo's assistance could make a world of difference. It would seem unlikely that Danzo would work with him in the Konoha invasion, but considering what his suspicions were, it may just happen. After all, if Orochimaru was right about who was still alive within the walls of Konoha, Danzo may very well need to destroy his former home before he has any chance of ruling it. Following the briefing about Orochimaru, Team 7's days became that of peaceful recuperation in preparation for the third exam. Naruto and his team were initially surprised to discover they were being allowed to compete considering the fact that they hadn't made it to the tower under their own power, but Minato had said it would be okay considering whom they'd had to fight. Orochimaru was certainly no genin. It would be cruel to disqualify them after they survived such an encounter. Those words from Minato had opened up other questions such as what would happen to Gaara. The Yondaime made it known that he would be permitted to continue participating in the exams. It would be an insult to Suna if they disqualified him on the grounds of his Jinchuriki status while Fu and Naruto were allowed to remain. Minato had doubted that their identities hadn't made it back to Suna's Junin instructor by now. He wasn't happy to know Suna had sent such an unstable Jinchuriki to these exams, but politics were politics. Disqualify Gaara because of his status would be enough to injure Konoha's relationship with Suna. And that could lead to a war. Orochimaru's veiled threat of Konoha being destroyed soon had come into consideration as well, but Minato waved off Kakashi's worries. He wasn't taking Orochimaru lightly, but he had a plan, an opportunity that Naruto had managed to acquire for them during his fight with Orochimaru. Minato needed time before he could execute his plan though, right now they weren't in a position to go through with it. Team 7 now had 3 days remaining before the second exam came to a close and Naruto was wondering how much of that time it would take before whatever his mother had done to Sakura would pass. Every time she was around him she seemed uncomfortable, though noticeably nicer. Naruto had tried asking his mother what happened, but all he ever received in reply was a saccharine smile that made him think asking her was a bad idea. He shifted his inquiries to Karen after the third attempt with his mother. The only thing Karen told him was that Kushina had put her under some genjutsu that Sakura could not seem to break and that after it was over she was a frightened mess, promising to never hit Naruto again. Naruto shivered. His mother was a scary lady. Another development within Naruto's team was the continued absence of Sasuke, though Naruto had a guess at what the Uchiha was doing. After finding out Naruto's mom was his godmother, really, what are the odds? Sasuke had been spending a lot of his time with her, determined to get to know the woman whom Makoto had considered to be such a good friend. Every once in a while Naruto would hang out with his mom and Sasuke when he wasn't spending time with Karen, Fu, or Hinata. By the time only one day remained until the second exam's end, Naruto was rather good friends with Fu. The two seemed to just click, understanding each other fairly well. The fact that they shared similar history as Jinchuriki wasn't the only reason either. They were rather alike in personality as well. Both of them were stubborn and brash. They were easily excitable and quick to piss off, yet held a fierce determination to protect what was precious to them. Naruto found Fu to be a kind-hearted girl and her rambling was even endearing. Naruto thought Fu's team was pretty cool too, though her male teammate, whose name he had yet to remember, was of the jumpy sort. The guy was easily frightened, but that only served to make Naruto and Fu intent on pranking him as many times as possible before the second exam ended. Fu's other teammate, Hajiri, was someone Naruto liked as well. She was pretty level-headed and her calmness seemed to be able to neutralize both Naruto's and Fu's energy. What Naruto liked most about Hajiri was the fact that she was furthering her ninja career despite the fact that she was blind. The young Namikaze could respect her determination. After hours of badgering her, Naruto even managed to get her to tell him how she manages to fight. He was astounded when he found out and understood why she finally ended up telling him. There was nothing anyone could really do to prevent it. As for Hinata, Naruto often conversed with her near the end of each day, happy to see that her health had improved. She hadn't fainted in front of him since their conversation at Ichiraku during the first exam. He hoped he could really start becoming friends with her now. Obviously, Naruto still had a ways to go when it came to understanding women, especially if he couldn't even figure out the excessively obvious Hinata. Hinata seemed to enjoy hearing about the usually outrageous things he'd done during the day and Naruto found her to be rather calming. Talking to her was a good way to wind down and prepare to sleep in his opinion. Hinata was a good listener, but he didn't let himself steal the whole conversation. He tried to get her to talk as much as he could and though he wondered a bit about her stutter, it eventually grew on him and there were moments where he even caught himself finding it cute. Naruto often attributed such thoughts to him getting tired, though that had nothing to do with it. At this point, more teams had made it to the tower, such as a Kabuto's team, Team Guy, the team from Odo, a team from Kumo, and Team 9. Counting his team, Hinata's, Fu's, and Gaara's that meant 9 times had passed the exams so far. He'd have to wait and see if any more teams would manage to pass tomorrow, but for right now he felt as though the competition was stiff enough. The final day of the second exam had come and gone with no more teams making it through. The morning started early for Team 7, the 3 of them choosing to get in a bit of training before they were called together for the announcement of the third exam. Not wanting to tire themselves out too much, Team 7 focused on less physical aspects of their skills. Naruto was meditating, attempting to speak with the Kyuubi, while a few of his clones worked on a Kaiden Jutsu, improving the control he had over his wind nature, and a new seal. Sasuke was putting Sakura under genjutsu that grew in difficulty each time she dispelled one while also doing an exercise to improve his control over his lightning chakra. Their training lasted for around an hour and a half before Kushina had come to get them. Sakura fidgeted all the way to a rather large room as she walked behind the woman, completely unnerved by her mere presence the whole time. Sasuke and Naruto really had to wonder what the hell Kushina had done to the pinkett within those genjutsu. Sakura refused to talk about it. Within the room were the other 8 teams who'd made it through to the third exam along with their Junin sensei, Anko, Kakashi, a few other Konoha Junin, and Sarutobi Hiruzen. After escorting her son and his team into the room, Kushina left, telling them that she was going to go keep Karen company. Following Kushina's departure, Anko stepped forward and began to speak. The headset she wore allowed her voice to reach throughout the room thanks to the speakers. First off, for the second test, congratulations on passing. As Anko looked out over the assembled genin, she considered how many of them had passed. 9 teams, of the 20 that entered the forest, 9 made it out. Among the 60 participants, for 27 of them to get this far, thought Anko, I said I'd cut them in half, but I was expecting single digits. Anko did notice that some of them looked beat up enough to not get any further than this though, Kiba in particular. The only reason he was even in the room right now was thanks to the wheelchair his Hyuga teammate had rolled him in on. If the next part of the exam was team-based, their whole squad would be disqualified. Luckily for them, it wasn't. Hokage-sama will now explain the third exam. Anko spoke once more, quieting the bit of celebration the Chunin hopefuls had begun. Listen carefully. Now then, Hokage-sama, please, said Anko. Everyone was expecting the Sandaime to step up, but instead they were greeted by a flash of yellow. Standing before them now was the Yondaime Hokage, Konoha's one and only yellow flash, Namikaze Minato. Most everyone was surprised to see a supposed dead man before them, the only exclusions being the Konoha men amongst them ranking higher than Chunin and the few genin that had already met him. Congratulations on making it this far, said Minato, completely disregarding the surprise of all the gathered shinobi. I know you must all be shocked to see me alive. I assure you if you stick around Konoha for the break between the second and third exam you will come to understand how this is possible. For now though, let us get down to business, shall we? Minato was still met with shocked silence. It's about time for you all to know the true purpose of these exams. The genin were confused, moving past their shock in order to discover what the Yondaime meant. What true purpose? Asked Fu, her voice raising above that of her peers. The smile Minato once had on his face when he first appeared vanished. You may wonder why these exams have genin from all of the allianced countries competing. Some of you may think it is to strengthen our bonds with friendly competition. Others may think it is to raise the level of our shinobi, said Minato, confusing many of the assembled genin further. That wasn't the reason for the exams. That would be wrong, Minato continued. These exams are nothing but a replacement for war amongst us. His words left an uncomfortable silence in their wake. Our countries were enemies before we became allies, and to lessen the excessive bloodshed, these exams came to be. You're here to give your all, to lay down your life for your village in their quest for prestige. Prestige, spat Karui, we're putting our lives at stake for accolades. Minato fixed her with a look that made her shut her mouth, and Naruto looked on in shock. He'd never seen his father like this. Yes, you are. You all are not children any longer, said Minato. It's time you realize that the world is not as black and white as you may think. Your village's very livelihood could hinge on your performance in these exams. You see, for the third exams, you will all be doing battle under the scrutiny of many important individuals, and these individuals are potential clients. You're the next generation of shinobi. Your performance during the third exam will show these clients what each participating village will be capable of. And that means something. The men and women watching you all will decide what village will receive their business and what village will not. These exams are not just exams. They're a business transaction. They're a mission for each and every one of you. The genin remained in silence. This was not what they'd been expecting. They thought the Chunin exams was just their ticket to promotion, not an important tool of the shinobi nations to garner the attention of clients to their villages. With that said, it's time I share the bad news, Minato continued. Unfortunately, the people watching the third exam tend to be very busy. With that in mind, the third exam, which will be a one-on-one tournament, needs to be short and sweet. So we need to thin the herd. Right here, right now, we will have the preliminary rounds of the third exam. You lose here and this is as far as you go. Before we begin, anyone who doesn't feel that they are up for it can leave. Simply raise your hand now. The only one whose hand went up was Kiba. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to prove that he was just as good a shinobi as any other genin in this room, but the reality was that his leg had been crushed. Gaara's sand had done a number on him and he would not heal in time for the third exam, even with the assistance of Medic Nin. Not that that really mattered. Kiba wouldn't heal in time for the preliminaries, seeing as how they were starting now. Minato nodded Kiba's way and Kurenai wheeled the frustrated boy out, his hands clenching the armrests of his wheelchair all the way out the door. Minato gave it a moment, but no one else raised their hand. The preliminaries were now officially underway. With a nod, Minato stepped back, allowing Gecko Hayate to take command as the referee while one of the wall panels in back of the gathered Konoha Junin began to rise. I am your referee for the preliminaries, Gecko Hayate. Behind me, he coughed out, gesturing to the now raised wall panel. Hayate looked rather sickly, making the genin wonder if he'd actually be alright. Is the electric scoreboard that will create the matchups for these fights. Much like the actual third exam, they will be one-on-one. The genin tensed and stared at the scoreboard. This was it. Let the preliminaries begin, coughed Hayate as the scoreboard came to life, cycling through name after name after name before stopping. The gathered genin stared up at the selected fighters for the first round. Some breathed out a sigh of relief, happy that they weren't first, while others felt the exact opposite, wishing they could get their fight over with. There we have it. The first round will be between Kunimitsu Taro of Takigakure and Uchiha Sasuke of Konohagakure, said Hayate. The two of you stay here. Everyone else to the second level. Naruto looked to Sasuke and gave him a grin. You better win this, Tem. His reply was a scoff from Sasuke as the boy's Sharingan whirred to life. As if there's any doubt. Naruto merely nodded and followed after all of the other retreating genin to the room's second level. He soon took his place next to Sakura and Kakashi before looking down at Sasuke and Fu's teammate, Taro. Naruto had to admit, he felt sorry for Taro. Being matched up against Sasuke right off the bat was unfortunate. Are the two of you ready? Questioned Hayate, his coughs following soon after. Taro jumped slightly, obviously nervous. The boy seemed perpetually nervous though. As for Sasuke, he merely gave a smooth nod. Then begin. Despite his jumpiness, Taro was the first to move, flinging shuriken at Sasuke as the Uchiha recovered a kunai from his pouch. Sasuke deflected the shuriken as Taro moved in behind them, hoping to catch Sasuke off guard. That would not be. The only thing Taro had managed to do was bring himself into the Uchiha's range. Sasuke deflected the last shuriken back at Taro, forcing the boy to duck his head in order to dodge. Though not as fast as Naruto, Sasuke still had quite a bit of speed himself and he used it to its fullest by closing the gap between him and Taro, his knee connecting with Taro's face. Sasuke followed up his attack with a kick that sent Taro stumbling back. The young Taki Nin recovered well, getting his bearings fairly quickly. It just wasn't quick enough. Kaden. Gokakyu. A large fireball escaped from Sasuke's mouth, hurtling towards Taro at an alarming rate. Freaking out, Taro barely jumped out of the way, his clothes singed from his close proximity to the mass of fire. Waiting for Taro was Sasuke. The Uchiha wasted no time. Taking advantage of Taro's surprise, Sasuke swept him off his feet and placed a kunai to his throat. The match was over. I forfeit, squeaked out Taro. Sasuke merely smiled. Up in the stands, Fu heaved a big sigh. Naruto, whose team happened to be between Fu's and Hinata's, looked over and gave his apologies. Poor Taro, whined Fu. Yeah, but no offense Fu, he seems kind of weak, Naruto replied, earning him a chastising glance from Sakura. He was being rude. As for Fu, she merely shrugged it off with another sigh. Well, Taro's specialty is in genjutsu, considering who he was matched up against, he didn't really have a prayer. His loss is most unfortunate, intoned Hajiri as Sasuke and Taro made their way to the second level. Once they'd rejoined their teammates, the board came to life once more and in moments the second match was decided. Yukushi Kabuto vs. Fu. Fu smirked at the appearance of her name, quite pleased to get her fight done with. Fu, called Naruto. The mint-haired girl looked his way, her head tilted to the side. Good luck, Ttebeo. Fu smiled at him and gave a nod before jumping over the rails, landing gracefully on the lower level. Kabuto walked down the stairs leisurely, seeing no reason to jump down like Fu had. Once the two were finally facing each other, Hayate asked if they were ready. They said yes and he began the match, stepping back as the two charged each other. Fu was fast in the air, but it seems that she was not lacking in speed on ground either. Kabuto was slower than her, not by much, but enough to give her a definitive advantage in speed. It was an advantage Fu capitalized on the moment the match begun. Though they'd both started the match in a dash at each other, Fu covered the distance between them faster, forcing Kabuto on the defensive from the get-go. Fu's fist shot out, grazing Kabuto's cheek as he tilts his head, barely dodging the blow. Kabuto replied with a swift uppercut that didn't make contact. Fu had jumped back, avoiding the strike before her footwork brought her right back into Kabuto's broken defense. She delivered a fist to his gut before twirling around to his left side, kicking at the back of his knee. Kabuto stumbled, falling forward. Catching himself, the bespectacled genin forced his body to the right just in time to watch Fu's foot come down where his head had once been. Quickly scrambling to his feet, Kabuto dropped back into his stance and watched as Fu bounced on her toes for a moment before she shot forward once more, zigzagging her way towards him, each of her steps leading her in a different direction than where she'd once been going. Up in the stands, Naruto whistled as he watched the fight. Fu's pretty fast, he compliments, and her style seems hard to deal with. You hadn't already noticed that? Sasuke inquired, sparing a glance at his teammate before his eyes focused once more on the fight, Sharingan active. Well, last I saw her fight, I had my own problems to deal with, plus I was hopped up on the furry bastard's chakra, Naruto replied with a shrug, kinda hard to make sense of things when I'm like that. Dad says I need to work on that, Naruto replies, not caring if he's overheard considering that his team was in between two teams that already knew about his father. Sasuke gave his usual, HN, before speaking again. Yeah, I guess it would be, Sasuke agreed, anyway, I got to see her use it in the forest and not much changes from when she's flying. She's in and out of enemy defenses in the span of a second, usually coming away from it unscathed based on this fight at the very least. The way she moves makes it pretty hard to aim at her if you're better at long-range fighting too. Before now I thought she specialized in mid to long range combat, but it seems her taijutsu isn't slacking either. She hasn't even gotten serious yet, I don't see Kabuto winning this. I wouldn't count Kabuto out just yet, Sasuke, Kakashi interjects, his eyes focused on his book. He may have taken these exams a multitude of times, but he's one of the best up-and-coming medic nin Konoha has to offer. Personally I think the only reason he keeps repeating is because he worries about others so much. Kabuto tends to do all he can to help out other Konoha nin. It's gotten him into a few sticky situations in the past. Sakura raised a brow at Kakashi's explanation, finding something of interest within his words as Sasuke shrugged. What does him being a medic nin have to do with him winning his match? Sakura inquired. And how do you even know all this stuff about him? Naruto adds. There weren't many reasons for a Junin like Kakashi to look into a genin. Naruto had learned enough from his parents to know the only reason a Junin would do that with someone that wasn't a genin on his team or a potential one, was if something about the genin was suspicious. Well, to answer your question Naruto, I've had a role in previous Chunin exams. I've come across him before. As for your question Sakura, a good medic nin can use their skills in battle. Just watch and you'll see. Naruto hummed, thinking over Kakashi's response to his question before he decided to take it at face value. It didn't really matter to him if he was lying anyway. He didn't know Kabuto like that. Sakura merely did as she was told, interested to see her first glimpse of a combat medic. Below them Fu was still putting pressure on Kabuto, basically pushing him around the arena with her speed and erratic movements. After a powerful blow to Kabuto's stomach, the bespectacled medic nin stumbled once more. Seeing a chance to end the match here, Fu shot forward, aiming a kick at Kabuto's head. She never saw his smirk. Right before her attack could land, Kabuto's right hand shot up, grasping Fu's right ankle as chakra coursed through it. Fu winced as Kabuto moved her leg aside and leapt in the opposite direction. The Jinchuriki of the Nanabi hit the concrete floor, rolling once before she attempted to stand. All she could manage to do was get to her knees. What did you do to my leg? Fu asked, frowning Kabuto's way. Kabuto merely smiled, adjusting his glasses. What did he do to Fu? Sakura asked, looking up at her sensei. He used a chakra scalpel, Kakashi replied, and cut the tendons in her ankle. That last stumble of his was just an act. He wanted her to try kicking him. He knew she'd use her legs to try and end things. It makes sense, Sasuke contemplated, mentally giving Kabuto praise on his planning. He's been testing out how Fu attacks this whole time. He must have noticed that when he stumbles she tries to finish him with her legs. It was just a matter of time before he decided to take them out. Hey, too bad that won't help him, chuckled Naruto. He doesn't even realize he's wasting his time. Kakashi raised a brow at this, wondering how he could possibly be wasting his time until he saw Fu literally sprout wings out of her back and rise into the air. Briefly, Kakashi realized that Sasuke had said Fu could fly. He also remembered reading over a really good paragraph in his book as Sasuke said it. Suddenly, and with a perverse smile hidden behind his book and mask, Kakashi knew exactly why he'd forgotten. Back on the lower level, Fu sighed as the genin in the upper level gaped at her, making all sorts of commotion over the fact that she had wings. She didn't get it. They were shinobi capable of spitting fire, causing tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, and lightning strikes. All she had were wings. They shouldn't impress the genin this much, in her opinion. Man, Fu groaned, I was really trying to save my ability to fly for later. You're pretty good though, tricking me like that. I'm not about to underestimate you again, with her piece said. Fu took a deep breath before exhaling a cloud of scale powder onto the arena. She kept her eyes on Kabuto, not that it mattered. If he moved she'd know where he went. He was in a cloud of powder created by her chakra after all. My scale powder is highly explosive. So here's the deal, you forfeit or I'm going to have to turn everything below me, which includes you, into a cloud of fiery death. Kabuto looked up at Fu, equal parts shocked and annoyed that she could fly. Really? She'd completely ruined all his work to cripple her. Restraining himself from huffing, he merely adjusted his glasses and raised his hands in surrender. Some of the genin wondered why he would give up so easily, but Kabuto was smarter than that. If he decided Fu was bluffing and she wasn't, he would most likely be dead. Basically, he just didn't see the possible risks outweighing the reward, which would probably still be his loss. He wasn't about to fight the girl seriously, after all. This was fine with him. He hadn't wanted to make it to the next round anyway. Besides, Kabuto knew Fu wasn't bluffing. He'd heard about her from Orochimaru. I yield. Hayate nodded and looked to Fu. Fu of Takigakure is the victor. Fu smirked as she was declared the winner of the round, the sound of confused and bewildered genin ringing out around her. Not how she wanted to win, but she didn't really care. A win was a win. And Fu liked winning. Hey, that's how Fu gets it done, she boasted. Conclusions and beginnings. Naruto whistled as Fu finished off Kabuto. Fu was good, that much Naruto could clearly tell. Smirking to himself, he hoped he got a chance to fight her in the main tournament, which he swore he would participate in, and test his mettle against her own. I expected no less, hummed Sasuke, crossing his arms as he deactivated his Sharingan. Kabuto had been a crafty opponent, but Fu outclassed him. It was just that simple. Yep, Naruto agreed, smiling and raising his hand for a high five as Fu flew back up to her spot next to him. With a smile of her own, Fu smacked her palm against his as she landed, her wings folding in on themselves and vanishing into her body as if they'd never existed. Various genin around the room eyed her, silently wondering where her wings had gone. You did great, TT Ibeo. Naruto beamed. Oh, Fu began, brushing some imaginary dust from her shoulder. It was nothing. My sheer awesomeness is too much to handle, she boasted, the smile on her face shifting into a smirk. Fu opened her mouth, intent on tooting her own horn a little more, but was quickly whacked on the head from behind. Yelping as her hands flew up to rub her cranium, Fu turned to see Hijri crossing her arms, a lone eyebrow raised in her direction. Hey, sorry. Got a little carried away there, huh? Fu inquired, attempting to placate her friend. A tad, yes, Hijiri intoned. Fu merely chuckled sheepishly as Naruto snickered a little behind her. As the Kyuubi Jinchuriki laughed, he didn't notice a pair of lavender pools trained on him. A small, almost imperceptible frown on the lips of Hinata Hyuga was the only thing betraying her mood, or so she thought. Her two index fingers pressed together repeatedly as she watched Fu and Naruto interact, a warm, almost hot feeling growing in her chest as she did so. Hinata was not particularly pleased to see the two of them getting along so well. She wanted Naruto to have friends, but the way he and Fu seemed to just click irked her. Though she feared that Sakura and the other kunoichi of their group would one day grow to see how amazing Naruto was, she admittedly did not think of them as competition at the moment, especially considering they had let her know they'd help with Naruto if she asked on more than one occasion. Fu, however, was an unexpected variable, and for the first time, Hinata could admit that she was jealous. Jealous and worried. She didn't want to lose Naruto to Fu, nor did she want to be on bad terms with the Greenet. Fu had saved her team when she didn't have to, and Hinata had been hoping to be her friend. Heaving a silent sigh, the Hyuga princess decided that she had to do something before anything developed between her crush and Fu. It was time to take Naruto up on his offer. So preoccupied with her thoughts, Hinata didn't realize that the names for the next round had been decided, and she was one of them. Feeling a tap on her shoulder, Hinata snapped back to reality. Kurenai smiled down at her before directing her attention to the screen. Hinata's eyes widened at the results. Hyuga Hinata vs. Zaku. Hinata's fingers pushed together more rapidly, her nerves making their way through her body from head to toe. She had been too focused on Naruto and Fu. It left the young heiress in a mental state that was unprepared for battle. Not too far away, Neji glanced at her, a look of disdain plastered on his face. He considered saying something to her briefly, intent on diminishing her confidence even further. Opening his mouth, he stopped short when he watched Naruto approach her. Hinata, the young Uzumaki called, prompting the Hyuga heiress' heart to start beating even faster than it already was. Turning to him, she stuttered out a reply. Why yes. You looked a little nervous, he commented. Naruto wouldn't say he knew her as well as his teammates or some of the other genin they graduated with, but the past 3 days he'd spent with her had allowed him to get to know her just a little better. One thing he noticed was how easily she could be flustered. Personally, he found it pretty interesting, but he knew she wouldn't be able to go into her fight like that. Hinata looked down to the floor now, embarrassed that he had noticed she was bothered. She knew it wasn't anything to get worked up over, but she was already a tad emotional because of her thoughts about Naruto and Fu, so this was only serving to exacerbate the problem. Hey, Naruto said again, gentler this time as he set a hand on her right shoulder. Her head snapped up to him, she hadn't expected any physical contact. Don't sweat the fight, okay? He grinned once more, though this grin wasn't nearly as wide and energetic as his usual one. Hinata swore it seemed almost tender. You're going to do great. You're strong. You think I'm strong? Of course. You made it here, didn't ya? That means something. You wouldn't be here if you weren't a capable kunoichi. Hinata looked into the eyes of her crush, his assuring gaze making her cheeks warm further as her confidence multiplied. Naruto is right, she thought with a small smile, I can do this. Thank you, she replied, the smile on her face growing brighter. Now more determined, Hinata made her way down the stairs past Naruto who was staring into the space she'd occupied oddly. After a moment, Sasuke called out to him, snapping him out of his thoughts. You gonna stand there all day, Dobi? Or are you going to watch Hinata's fight? Ah, yeah, Naruto calls back as he turns and walks the few feet back to his team. Below them, Hinata had just made it down to the arena floor. Standing opposite of her was Zaku. His arms were crossed with a smirk adorning his face, though his tapping foot betrayed his impatience. Hinata observed him for a moment before Hayate asked them if they were ready. Hinata nodded as the veins around her eyes bulged, activating her Byakugan. Across from her, Zaku unfolded his arms and crouched as if ready to pounce. Taking this as confirmation, Hayate backed away as he shouted, "Begin!" "Zankaha!" growled Zaku, thrusting his arms forward and releasing a blast of air and sound towards Hinata. Having seen the build-up of his chakra before he'd even spoken, Hinata was already fully prepared to evade his assault, and thus she easily sidestepped his attack before she rushed him. Clicking his tongue, Zaku fired off another attack from his hands which Hinata easily dodged, dancing around the wave. As the Hyuga heiress closed in, she flew through hand signs before holding a hand to her mouth and inhaling. Suiten. Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. Exhaling, Hinata released a small wave of water from her mouth that immediately began to squirm and change forms into a perfect duplicate of the girl. In tandem, the twin Hyugas moved in. The vanguard Hinata met Zaku in a clash of limbs as he brought his leg up to kick her only to be blocked by a single hand. Gritting his teeth, he rose his arm, prepared to fire his jutsu point blank only for the rear Hinata to strike his right arm and leg rapidly. Losing balance, Zaku began to fall backwards only for the Hinatas to deliver vicious double-handed palm strikes to his stomach and back. A decisive end to the fight as Zaku's eyes shut and he dropped to the ground. He didn't get back up. "Winner, Hyuga Hinata," Hayate announced. Hinata took a deep breath as she deactivated her Byakugan amidst the cheers of her friends and comrades. She'd been so nervous before the match began, but talking to Naruto had really done wonders. He'd restored her confidence, and from there she would silently admit that the fight was rather easy. She'd been expecting more from her opponent. With a small yet content smile on her face, Hinata made her way back up the stairs where she was met with praise from her teammates, Kurenai, Fu and Naruto. "That was great," complimented Fu as she gave the girl a quick, but tight hug. Kurenai offered her student a tender smile. She'd known Hinata could do it. "Told you you'd do great," Naruto grinned. Hinata looked to him, a bashful smile on her lips. "It's thanks to you. If you hadn't encouraged me, I wouldn't have been calm enough to fight." "Hey," Naruto replied, "what are friends for? Glad I could help, TT Ibeo." Hinata nodded and began pushing her fingers together as she usually does before suddenly stopping. She looked up at Naruto, silence reigning over them for a few moments before she finally spoke. Also, do you think I could take you up on that offer to treat me to cinnamon buns after the prelims?" Naruto blinked once, having not expected her to suddenly ask that. He didn't remain quiet for long though, and soon his grin widened. "Of course." Tayuya flexed her fingers as she spun her flute around in her right hand. She was alone right now, which was frankly the only reason she didn't have a scowl plastered on her face. She was currently in the northern area of Konohagakure, lounging in an out-of-the-way cafe under the guise of henge. She hadn't thought it would be this easy to infiltrate Konoha, but she supposed it wouldn't have gone so well if Orochimaru had tried to smuggle in the entirety of the Sound Five. Tayuya didn't like giving credit to her enemies if she could help it, but here she would begrudgingly admit that Konohagakure's security was thorough. She was thankful she hadn't been caught. Orochimaru made it clear that he needed an operative inside the village. The Junin and Anbu has been becoming increasingly suspicious of Kabuto. Though the boy tried his best to hide his true nature, little moments here and there during battle in his previous Chunin exams had slowly been giving him away. Orochimaru had doubted he'd last through to the true third round of the prelims without being revealed. Thus, Tayuya found herself within the village in order to pose as a spy for the next few weeks. She had been the most sensible choice. Not many people would question a seemingly civilian woman. She could admit that there was no way her other idiot teammates would have pulled this off, but in the end that didn't mean much to her. It didn't change the fact that she hated this particular mission. Watching all the trash of Konoha go about their lives merrily pissed her off. They didn't know true suffering or struggle, and yet they enjoyed luxuries she hadn't even been afforded back when she was her most innocent. The village made her skin crawl. Huffing, Tayuya reined in her emotions and straightened her face, glancing around to make sure no one was staring. Briefly, she locked eyes with a red-haired woman who looked away soon after, but Tayuya paid it no mind. She didn't care if some random civilian glances at her for a second. Heaving a sigh before taking another sip of her tea to further even out her nerves and soothe her once again slowly growing annoyance, Tayuya hoped Orochimaru's meeting with Danzo went well so they could start the plan already. She wanted to be on her way back to base. The prelims continued to progress smoothly following Hinata's match. 4 fights had begun and ended since her victory. Samui and Tamari had faced off after her. Though Samui gave it her best, she was ultimately defeated. Temari's noteworthy control of the wind element proved too much for the Kumo Kunoichi as the woman only really had Raiden techniques in her repertoire. She returned to her team with a lesson learned. Variety could be the difference between victory and defeat. Following the 2 Kunoichi was Shino and Hajiri. The match had been quick. Shino attempted to have his Kikaichu quickly and stealthily drain Hajiri of her chakra, but the second one of his bugs neared, it was shredded. The ever-quiet Aburame tried one more tactic before forfeiting his match. The woman's wind element was too powerful for him to combat at his current level. The only thing to come of further battle would be the loss of more of his hive. The fight was not worth that. Hajiri's victory dealt Konoha their first defeat of the prelims, if you didn't count Kabuto that is. The next bout had been between Ino and Omoi of Kumo. Ino attempted to use her clan's signature jutsu, but Omoi was not one to sit idly by. She could never find a good moment to land her technique as the Kumo nin moved in, and before she knew it, she was staring down the edge of a blade. She made an attempt to best him in taijutsu, realizing that her clan techniques would do no good against him, but he was simply the superior combatant and defeated her soundly. Neji against Karui of Kumo came next. The outcome was brutal and fast. Neji crushed her swiftly, leaving her to be rushed to the med bay on a stretcher. Heated glares were what he received for his victory by a number of competitors. The sheer brutality he'd used to defeat the redhead had been completely unnecessary. That match hadn't been about victory. It was personal, plain and simple. Naruto in particular was trying to burn a hole through the side of Neji's head. He'd heard about what stick was lodged up Neji's eyes during the older boy's fight from Hinata. What happened to him was doubtlessly tragic, but that had nothing to do with Karui. All Neji was doing by brutalizing her was igniting flames of vengeance in her teammates. What good was that? He was so wrapped up in his thoughts that he almost missed what popped up on the screen. Almost. Uzumaki Naruto vs. Tenten. Thoughts of Neji were literally erased from the forefront of Naruto's mind as the young Namikaze began to head towards the stairs. Gee, good luck, Naruto, Hinata stuttered. The blonde flicked her a thumbs up before he began to pass Fu, who merely nodded along with Hajiri, who smiled. Sakura did the same and Sasuke merely smirked as he leaned on the railing, not even sparing his rival a glance. Win, Dobi. Naruto snorted at the remark before grinning devilishly. Count on it, Tem. He and Tenten made it down to the battlefield and Hayate began the fight. Naruto was about to lunge until Tenten spoke. I heard from Guy-sensei that you're a true Uzumaki. Naruto rose a brow at her question, but kept on guard as he vaguely remembered who that was. He'd never met Guy personally, but he had heard of him through his parents. What of it? I want to see how good your swordsmanship is, she replied as she unsealed a katana from a scroll. It's been years since anyone has ever fought a practitioner of Senpu no Mai, Tenten added as she got into a stance. A stance Naruto recognized. You learned from Yugao? Naruto asked as the seal for his katana appeared in the palm of his left hand. His blade rose up and he drew it before settling into the eye of the storm stance. Tenten nodded and prepared herself. Naruto smiled. Then this should be fun. I accept your challenge, Tenten. However, if one of us deems the other too strong to take on with swordsmanship alone, we use everything at our disposal, deal? What good is losing without going all out? Tenten agreed to Naruto's stipulation and then a silence passed over them as a stare-down began. Up in the stands, Sasuke narrowed his eyes. He'd know that his teammate had told him everything he'd practiced with during their 2 months of training, but clearly he'd held back some information. Sasuke wasn't surprised though. He'd kept some things to himself too. Naruto knows swordsmanship? Sasuke inquired, directing his question to his sensei. The other rookies and genin around him listened in, curious. Considering the cat was already out of the bag, Kakashi figured he may as well answer. It's not like knowing the basics of Senpu no Mai would save them from it after all. Yes, the Uzumaki clan was very versatile. Aside from being Fuinjutsu experts, they were also known for their devastating taijutsu and kenjutsu. Their kenjutsu, the Senpu no Mai, is a style of extreme speed focusing on multiple strikes. Practitioners are seen swinging their blade only once, but truly swinging any number of times. Their speed is just typically so superior to their enemies that one swing is all that can be perceived. And I suppose that's why his stance has very few openings despite Naruto seemingly just standing there without any sort of guard. Hajiri interjected, not truly asking a question, his speed is just so great that he should be capable of defending regardless of the lack of guard. Kakashi nodded at her observation. The initial stance of Senpu no Mai is merely a ploy. A very dangerous one, Kakashi replied before looking back to the battle. Now pay attention, young ones. It's about to begin. The gathered genin focused back on the stair down below just in time to see Tenten move in. She covered the distance between herself and Naruto fairly quickly, attempting a horizontal swipe at his shoulder only to swipe at air. Naruto was faster. He dropped into a crouch, his katana already scything towards Tenten's legs. Reacting swiftly, Tenten jumped above the slash only to gasp for air as the hilt of Naruto's katana crashed into her abdomen. She felt the seemingly singular blow strike home 3 times. Tenten slid back a few feet and caught her breath as she looked back to the blonde who was now back in his initial stance. What just happened? Questioned Ino. He slashed at her legs and gave her a blow with his hilt when she dodged, Sasuke commented, Sharingan active. He'd almost missed the whole exchange. Without his Sharingan he would be just as confused as Sakura. Isn't that a little dangerous? Ino inquired, concerned. He could have seriously hurt her and she's from Konoha just like us. She would have been fine, Hajiri responded, yet elaborated no further. Kakashi was the one to do that. She's right. The Senpu no Mai requires its practitioners to know wind release. And while that element is hailed for its cutting power, it can also work quite well to cushion blows. I imagine Naruto would have only left some nasty bruises if he has the proper control. If, Sasuke repeated with a snort, but that doesn't matter, he added as he narrowed his eyes at Naruto. His blade specifically. The blade he's using is blunted. You're really fast, Tenten compliments, and your movements are so sudden that I couldn't react quite fast enough, but you're not faster than a certain teammate of mine. I can take you, she grinned. Naruto smiles in reply to the challenge. Good to know. I can pick up the pace then. With those words Naruto vanished again. Faster this time, Tenten was unprepared, but reacted quickly once she caught sight of him in front of her. Aim. Thrusting forward, Naruto's katana shot towards her and she managed to block it and maneuver out of the way of the seemingly simultaneous thrusts aimed for her limbs. Or so she'd thought. She'd managed to block and dodge a total of 5 thrusts only to be grazed and struck along her arms and legs by 10 more. Tenten slid back, her body stinging as she grit her teeth and tightened the grip on her sword. Taking a breath, she performed an Oborozukyo which Naruto blocked with relative ease. Tenten's was nothing compared to Yugao's. Tenten was about to follow up on the attack before her instinct screamed at her. Acting swiftly, she substituted herself with the scroll she'd had her katana sealed in and watched as it was assaulted by a flurry of slashes from below and above. She heard Naruto click his tongue at her escape as he relaxed back into his style's initial stance. Tenten stared him down once more and realized that whether she could keep up with him or not, his swordsmanship alone was simply better than hers. Naruto had more mastery over his style and techniques than she did. I'd really been hoping for this to be swordsmanship only. I can't win like that though, Tenten trailed off, frowning at the necessity to submit to the fact he was superior. She didn't plan on losing though. Grabbing 2 scrolls she kept on her person as Naruto's eyes narrowed in seriousness, Tenten unfurled them as she jumped up and began her technique. Soshoryu. With speed and deadly precision, Tenten flung the hundreds of weapons that appeared from her scrolls at Naruto. Grinning, Naruto met the assault head-on, dodging what he could and deflecting what he couldn't. Eventually, the blonde set his eyes back on Tenten to look for an opening only to find that she was gone. Shit, he thought as she came up on his left. Her blade thrust forward, signing through the air as she fully planned to best him in this moment. Naruto quickly met her katana with his own, only for her to let go of her weapon and duck below Naruto's strike. Smirking at a job well done, Tenten grabbed another scroll and unsealed its contents as she jumped away from Naruto. From out of the scroll flew a large, spiked ball. It slammed into Naruto and created a dust cloud that obscured the 2 combatants from the view of their spectators. Ouch, muttered Fu, her fellow Jinchuriki was good and she knew he was durable. All Jinchuriki were, but she knew that had to have hurt. Yosh. It seems Tenten's youth has finally overcome that of Naruto's. Grinned Lee. A multitude of the gathered genin seemed to agree with his observation, Team 7 and the Junin, however. I think Tenten's in trouble now, Sakura stated. This drew a slew of odd looks from the gathered genin. Sakura didn't really pay them any mind though. They didn't know what she knew. They hadn't seen what Naruto could now do. But they would soon. Her biggest mistake was choosing to remove their restrictions. Now that more than just swordplay can be used, well, Sasuke trailed off here, smirking. He knew Naruto had this in the bag. There was simply too much at his disposal for him to lose to Tenten. Not at her current level. The Uchiha couldn't wait until he could face off with the blonde. As the dust cleared, it became apparent to the other genin that Sasuke and Sakura may be right. Positioned in the center of the battlefield below was a half-dome of chains, Naruto at their center. Tenten's eyes were wide. She couldn't believe he'd managed to defend against her so quickly, she'd unleashed her attack point blank. Gritting her teeth, Tenten took up a defensive stance with her katana as the chains began to recede back into Naruto's body. A light scowl seemed to have set itself on Naruto's face, not in anger, but in focus. He'd almost gotten hit by her attack. Naruto had to admit Tenten was pretty strong when she put her mind to it. The young Namikaze decided not to give her another shot at him. Who knows, he might not overcome the next one. Naruto looked his opponent in her eyes and grinned. You're great, Tenten. We'll have to do this again sometime. With those words, Naruto blurred from her view before she found him upon her, his katana tearing through the air from her right. Quickly she lifted her blade to block only for Naruto to stop short as something coiled around her left leg. Gasping, she was pulled off her feet and flung into the far left wall as she dropped her katana. 3 more chains escaped from Naruto's body and wrapped themselves around her other limbs before reeling her in. Naruto let his blade rest against her neck lightly and with a sigh, Tenten admitted defeat. What the hell was that? Spluttered Kiba. Kongo Fusa. The Uzumaki clan's Kekkei Genkai, Guy replied, Yin release chains capable of assisting in Fuinjutsu as well as being immune to certain elements based on their wielder. Apparently, they have other capabilities as well, but that's not information for me to divulge. Down below, Naruto freed Tenten and they began to head back up the stairs side by side. Guy Sensei told me about your Kekkei Genkai, but I'd been hoping you hadn't unlocked it yet. Hee hee, I'm glad I did. Really saved my in our fight. You're pretty sneaky, Tenten. Really wasn't expecting the spiked ball, Naruto replied with a grin. Tenten offered a small grin of her own, enjoying the praise from her opponent. She may have lost, but she was at least a little happy to know she'd surprised him. Thanks. Your swordsmanship is something else too. I wish I had been more of a match. It's all thanks to my Naruto caught himself before he slipped and said Mom. That would have been hard to explain right now, my mentor. She's very strong. I bet she could teach you a thing or two, actually. She knows more than just the Senpu no Mai. Really? Began Tenten, tentatively, do you think you could ask for me? No prob. Naruto grinned, I'll ask after the prelims end. Smiling, Tenten gave the boy a quick hug. Thanks, Naruto. Nodding in reply, the two of them reached the top of the stairs where their friends were waiting. Lee tried to comfort his defeated teammate in his own way as Naruto's team congratulated him. Hidden deep in the forests outside of Konoha, surrounded by tall trees and large rocks was the almost unnoticeable entrance to a cave. Inside, past the dripping ceiling and slippery rock floors was a drop only a shinobi could hope to maneuver. The bottom was impossible to make out, obscured by the darkness of the cave. Should one manage the drop, however, they would find themselves landing on hardwood floors illuminated by torchlight along the walls. The obscuring darkness above was merely a powerful genjutsu. This was the scenery Orochimaru and Kimimaro were met with. Guiding them was a pale boy with straight black hair and a half shirt. Orochimaru grinned at the rouse Danzo used to hide himself. The old man certainly knew how to vanish, it seems. Continuing to follow Danzo's subordinate, Orochimaru and his most loyal follower headed deeper into the winding underground tunnels of the man-made cave system. After further walking, a few turns here and there, and passing up a multitude of doors, the trio found themselves before a large double door. Sai pushed it open and walked in, where he quickly took up position next to Danzo, kneeling. Smirking, Orochimaru walked into the room. Welcome, Orochimaru, Danzo greeted. Danzo, Orochimaru replied back, to think you would fall so low, but I suppose I can help rectify that. If you would just be so kind as to divulge some information. Orochimaru wasn't typically one to forego his mind games and let his silver tongue rest, but he wanted to cut to the chase. He had a sort of deadline he set for when he needed to be back in the village after all. Orochimaru had left a clone to watch over how the preliminaries developed, but there was no guarantee his cover would remain intact. That in mind, he didn't want to be away for too long. Nodding, Danzo spoke. You've got a basic understanding of who has returned to Konoha thanks to the message I had Sai here deliver. Yes, Orochimaru grimaced, I've already changed up my invasion plans thanks to that information. But I will be needing more details, the snake said, and a new way to get the full force of my army into the village, he added as an afterthought. I can provide you with all of that, however, I want to make sure we have an accord. I will help you invade Konoha and bring Hiruzen and Minato low. In return, however, I would ask that you do not entirely destroy the village and its forces. If you agree to these terms, once this is over and I am instated as the new Hokage, you will be welcome within Konoha's walls once more. You will have access to our resources. Essentially, Oto and Konoha will be allied. Orochimaru hummed, seemingly thinking it over. He wanted Konoha burned to the ground, but he could see the benefits to Danzo's plan. Having the Leaf as an ally would grant him far more subjects to experiment on as well. Grinning eerily, Orochimaru gave his agreement. I believe, Danzo, that we do in fact have an accord. Konohagakure no longer had to fear destruction. No, now they had to fear a coup. Hayate called the final fight as he announced Lee victorious. The fights following Naruto's had been fairly quick. Sakura had gone after her blonde teammate and defeated one of Kabuto's teammates soundly. The fight had not been long at all, something Kakashi had noted as odd from the stands. His genin ultimately didn't care though. With her victory, Team 7 was the only complete team to make it through the prelims. Following Sakura had been Dosu vs Choji. Despite some motivation from his sensei, Choji was bested in the end. He had put up quite the fight, nearly crushing Dosu into a wall and almost rolling over the Oto Nin on numerous occasions, but a well-placed strike with Dosu's melody arm shut the Akamichi down for good. He was taken back up to the stands by Shikamaru where he would eventually wake up. Gaara had gone next. Hayate had managed to stop the Suna Jinchuriki from killing the last of Kabuto's teammates, but the young man's legs were crushed and deemed impossible to heal. Gaara went back to the stands, leaking killing intent and irritation at the lost kill. Shikamaru was next. He took on Kin of Oto. For a while it seemed as though she had the upper hand, but Shikamaru showed his true colors by the end of the fight. Despite his laziness, he had an excellent mind and used it well. The end of the match saw Kin knocking herself out due to shadow possession after Shikamaru had maneuvered her towards the wall. She had a raging headache when she finally woke up. The last fight had been Lee's, of course. Kankuro thought he'd had the fight in the bag as he kept Lee at range. That all changed when Lee removed the weights hidden beneath his leg warmers. In a blaze of speed, he tore past Kankuro's puppets and delivered such a devastating blow to the puppeteer that he was knocked unconscious despite having been, safely, controlling his puppet from his hiding spot on its back. With that last fight out of the way, the shinobi that would be facing off in the true third round were decided.